Excellent. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us at our McKinney HR mediation webinar. So we are very lucky to be joined today by two of our mediators who have both got many years of experience in this subject area. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Barbara, whose expertise lies with both human resources and mediation. Barbara has almost 15 years of hands-on experience and is passionate about mediation. And over the last 3 years, she's been working with us at McKinney HR, skillfully navigating mediations for our clients. While our primary focus is on workplace disputes, Barbara's also handled tenant conflicts, family mediations, showcasing her versatility. So Barbara is registered with the Scottish Mediation Network. So she abides by their standards and codes of conduct. And as a member of the network, she's required to provide annual figures to show the mediations that she's undertaken. And she engages in ongoing professional development to maintain her competence as well. So the other mediator we have is our Irene, and she spent her entire full-time professional career in HR with a specific focus on employee relations. Her experience in handling formal disputes sparked an interest in mediation, and she qualified as an ACAS workplace mediator in 2007. Additional to this, she introduced a successful internal mediation service at Marks & Spencer. On leaving corporate life, Irene graduated with an MSc in Mediation and Conflict Resolution from the University of Strathclyde in November 2022. Sorry, Irene. During her studies, she volunteered at the university's mediation clinic, which handles simple procedure cases. So Irene's been an associate with McKinney HR for 4 years and has handled numerous cases across the public, private, and third sector. She's a registered practitioner with the Scottish Mediation Network and a member of their Workplace and Employment Initiative group. So fantastic knowledge from both of them today. So what we're going to do is Dorothy is going to start today's session with some background information, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session with Barbara and Irene. So we do welcome your own questions as well for Irene, Barbara, or Dorothy in the chat box, and I'll be managing that myself, so I'll keep an eye on it. Bit of housekeeping as well before we launch into the rest of the webinar. There's many of you on the call today. I think everybody is on mute, but just double check if you can, please. And then I'll pass over to you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Rona. We thought we'd just have a couple of quick slides so that we're all coming from the same place with this. So just, this is CIPD, cost of conflict, enormous amount of money spent on conflict by organisations. 1,000 quid a year per person is extraordinary. And the top two reasons or two challenges that leaders have is managing conflict and having difficult conversations. So, mediation becomes a very, very resource-free way of resolving conflict. I just have a quote there which you can have a wee look at, and I think it explains really well for us and for you, hopefully, what mediation is. It is that structured process by an impartial mediator who facilitates communication between those in dispute to help them understand each other and come up with a mutually acceptable solution that will improve the working relationship in the future. They do that, our mediators do that by exploring ideas, feelings and concerns. And this is the skills of the mediator to open up individuals through our process. Enable each to understand where each other's coming from and empathise with each other's feelings. Very often it's the first time that they've been able to get what it feels like to the other person. Get that insight into how they're coming across that whole kind of intent and impact. That wasn't what I intended, but actually that's how it was picked up. Developing skills to resolve issues in the future. That whole mediation process and the structure and how the mediators act gives skills as to how they will the individuals can resolve issues themselves later. And finding that solution that both sides feel is fair, which is a really positive and constructive way to end that process. And using all of that conflict energy as a really positive resource to help resolve the conflict. And our model of mediation, there's lots of different models, is what we would call the interactive mediation model. And Irene and/or Barbara will talk a wee bit more about this as to how that works. However, we do the pre-meeting one-to-one with each of the parties. We then, and that opportunity to tell their story, think about how they're going to put their point across, what the process looks like, some ground rules, and signing a confidentiality agreement. The joint session, it comes in kind of 6 parts, and the mediator will work their way through this. Introductions and ground rules, hearing what has happened from each party, identifying and discussing the issues. That process of each party agreeing, yes, those are the issues, really critical. Then thinking about, well, how's that impacting on each other, and coming up with ideas and solutions and agreeing what those might be working forward. After the mediation, if needed, we get asked quite a lot to come back and do a check-in as to how the parties are feeling about it. That's our process. And now what we'll do is we'll move in to asking, I'll run through a series of questions, some for Barbara, some for Irene, and go back and forwards a little bit, which helps open all of that out so that you can get a real feel for how that works in practice. So we'll start with Barbara. Barbara, what is mediation and what isn't it? Because we often get asked to talk through what mediation is. So what would you respond to that?
So probably a lot of it has been covered in your previous slides, but just to sort of emphasise some of the way I would say mediation is an informal. I think there's a bit of a misconception there that people think it's a formal process. It's an informal, and as you said, Dorothy, it's flexible and a confidential process used to settle disputes, conflict between two parties or more. Or businesses or organisations. So the mediator is appointed. The mediator is an independent and impartial third person, and that's really to support that person through, the conflict or the issues that they face. Mediator will negotiate and help them to come to, a mutual agreement. And if that can't happen, then they talk them through the best solution. I suppose most people in workplace conflict need to work together. They need to be professional, and I think it's about drawing that out. I suppose what you asked me what is and what it isn't. Yeah. So quite often we get organisations come to us and they're looking for us to manage the person's performance. Mediation's not about managing performance. And quite a lot of the time, the performance issues are what causes the conflict, because the colleague doesn't actually understand, or maybe they maybe disagree that there is a performance issue. So that's sometimes what causes the conflict. But the mediation is more about the working relationship, as opposed to the performance in the workplace. It's also not, the mediator doesn't decide what the outcome of mediation is. Either. So, it's about, this is an opportunity for these two parties to shape their future by having structured adult-to-adult discussion.
That's fantastic. Absolutely. What facilities do you need as a mediator when you're going into a company? What is it you need practically to make it happen?
So well, so the good thing is that you've got two parties or more coming along to and agreeing to mediate. That's probably a real key thing. But I think the privacy to allow them to have that confidential, safe space. Quite often, where possible, I would prefer to have more than one room. So you've got the room where you would mediate together, and you would have all parties together. And you know, sometimes mediations can be very emotional. They can be quite heated. You know, debates can happen. So it's quite good for the mediator to have that opportunity to have breakout rooms. That's what we would call that. To allow the parties just to cool off or to pull themselves together. You know, if emotions, because as I say, they can be quite emotional. Quite good for, you know, teas, coffees, water. Yeah, just it's almost like a conversation then, and a chat as opposed to this formal situation. Sometimes I use a flip chart if we get to agreement. You touched on the agreement element earlier. Sometimes that's something that I would ask for. It's not always a requirement, but it just depends on. I think it depends on the individuals, and you're probably, we'll go into this in a bit more detail, but in the one-to-one sessions you probably gauge that more. You know what that looks like. Where possible, I would try to have a meeting away from that person's workplace, or certainly on a different floor if that's possible, just to avoid interruption as well.
And I guess everybody's seeing what's happening and
of course, yeah, because you know what happens in normal workplaces. People are nosy, and they want to know who's that and why are you in that room and what's going on in there. So that's probably what I would say would be my requirements as a mediator. Yeah,
which is excellent. What's the best time to do a mediation? Do you think, you know, thinking after conflict has escalated, before, during? What's your thoughts?
So quite often what happens is, my view would be to do it prior to a grievance, possibly. You know, if you identify that there's conflict between two parties, then sooner rather than later. You know, if you can, if you see two people in conflict, then some business or workplaces would try to do mediation themselves. I think that depends on the level of conflict. If you identify that there's real conflict there, I would involve a third party. That way you're then not putting yourself in a position where you could be accused of taking one side or the other, whereas the impartiality piece you know, is key in that situation. There are times when mediation's recommended as an outcome for a grievance. But then the damage is done almost, isn't it? There's been lots of other people involved, whereas if you can have a mediation at the outset, there's two people involved in that, and that's the two people that are in conflict. Or as I say, if it's a team situation. So I would say mediation at the earliest possible opportunity.
What's your thoughts on remote versus face-to-face? We've been doing a lot more, obviously during COVID we did a lot of remote. We never thought it would work, but it did. What's your thoughts now that we're out the other end?
Yeah, so COVID affected us all in the mediation world, and I suppose you still can do mediation on a remote basis. However, you don't get the feel. You know, that can identify. Most times, if somebody's uncomfortable on a screen, it's a very different set of circumstances, isn't it? Or, you know, if I suppose on a face-to-face basis, you know that there's no other party involved. So, you know, that I have had a mediation where somebody was in the background and I didn't know about it. So that makes you feel quite uncomfortable. Face-to-face would be my preference, but that's me personally. What I find I'm tending to do at the moment is the one-to-one sessions, possibly remotely. And I always would recommend the joint session to be face-to-face. Because sometimes when you've got people in conflict, that's the first time they're in a room together. And it's almost like let's set this out, let's start it off by this face-to-face discussion. Difficult it is, I know, I quite understand and appreciate that that's difficult for the parties involved, but it's much better, and it's almost like the first step in the next stage of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really helpful. If we just to finish up on the setup side of things, if clients will often contact us and say we've individuals, but we're not sure they're that keen. Is there anything that we can do to help people who are reluctant or worried about it?
Yeah, and I think people are reluctant and concerned because it's a new concept to them. Most people maybe go through one mediation in their lifetime. So it's because it's a new process. They don't know what's going to happen. But we can provide. Before I go into that, it's probably fear of unknown, isn't it? That we're all a bit wary of. But we can provide a document that explains the mediation process. We can also offer a short call. So before the actual one-to-one session, a quick call and I suppose that starts the mediator building a rapport with the party. And it kind of just, it's not going to be, well, it will be difficult. If you're in conflict, it's quite difficult, but it's to try and ease them into that process and actually can talk to them about the success. So 85% of mediations are successful. And it also, I always think, it gives you the opportunity to have your say, because the conflict might be that you're not able to have your say because the other party talks over you, and in that process that you're allowed that safe speaking time. And I'm going on to something else, but it just gives you that opportunity.
And I guess what just confirming we can help with that. That's really helpful.
Sorry, I was just, me, Dorothy, I was just going to add something else. I suppose at that point, you can also establish if there's any reasonable adjustments that are required. You might not have been made aware of that. So, and the mediator will work with that.
Really important. Thanks. Thank you, Barbara. No, that's fine. I'll move over to Irene and I'll come back to you in a minute, Barbara.
Okay.
So, Irene, nice to see you.
You too, Dorothy.
When Barbara, Irene and I met last week, we could have talked for 2 hours. So,
or more.
More, I know. So we'll move on to the one-to-ones then, and I'll try and speed up a little bit. What happens at the one-to-one? How long does it take, Irene?
Oh yeah, that's so interesting. What a great question, Dorothy. How long does it take? How long is a piece of string? We would like to say it's a minimum probably of 1.5 to 2 hours, maybe a maximum of 3.5. It kind of depends on the individual and the case that presents. And I think this is where we can be really flexible with the client. Because
and I guess it just not, sorry interrupting you, but it's that bit of this could be the first time they've actually been able to tell their story.
Exactly.
And getting that story out in a safe place could be a major positive step in actually resolving it.
And getting that out in a private space is probably a really key thing for them. So I think as mediators, Barbara, I'm sure would agree, we go into these meetings thinking, well, it might last an hour and a half, but you know what? It might last 3.5. We're so flexible. We've just got to listen.
Whatever the person needs. Because the investment in that time early helps the joint process later.
Exactly. And I think what I would probably want to say, Dorothy, in these individual meetings, there's probably 3 key areas of focus for me. Number 1 would be explaining the process. Because people that haven't been involved in mediation are probably a bit frightened. They're probably not particularly aware of what's going to go on. So I'd want to take that time to explain to them, here's how the process is going to work and how it's going to support you as an individual. I'd also want to explain to them, tell me about what you want to get from this. What outcome do you want? What's your desired outcome? And I think thirdly, I want to hear the story. What's your issues? What's going on for you? What's happening? What's not working? So I think in saying that hopefully explains the 1.5 hour to the 3.5 hour thing, because you're kind of not sure how long that's going to take.
Yeah.
My role, I think, in that is to build confidence with the party,
Yeah.
build a rapport, and get them trusting not just me, but the process, so they can talk really openly about what's going on for them. And I would take that opportunity as well to talk to them about the confidentiality, the impartiality, the voluntary nature, and the informal nature. So, I mean, I think the way we work, Dorothy, in McKinney HR, we keep it quite flexible.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
It's the only way, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things that we spoke about when we spoke before was that we find that the main reason for mediation that we get is between manager and a reportee.
Yeah.
And I guess it's really helpful, I think, to talk about how do you manage that power imbalance? What's your strategy to even that up?
Oh my God, Dorothy, of all the things we do, that's probably the trickiest thing. It truly is. And I'm going to say that to the audience. It's the trickiest thing. And I think what we've got to work really hard at is listening to each party, understanding what their issues are, understanding what matters to them, and just maintaining that absolute neutrality. And you know what, when you've worked in HR and you offer advice and I guess you try to support people, it's really hard. It is really hard. But I think we've got to stay true to our kind of credentials of neutrality.
And I guess that power imbalance, it's also then about, in the one-to-ones, making sure that each person is, you're there as an individual, you're not there as their manager, you're not there as the reportee, you're there as yourself. And you, the mediator, will support that. I've often been asked in mediations, I'm scared to go in and face them because they'll do X, Y, Z. And I've always said, trust me. As you've said, trust the process. Trust me, I won't let that happen. I might let it happen a tiny bit for us to get feelings out, but it won't go to a stage of being unacceptable. So trust me, I'll manage that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Dorothy. The whole trust thing, trust me, I'm a mediator. I mean, that's. I mean, it sounds a bit cheesy, doesn't it? But you're absolutely right. People need to know that you've got their best interests at heart.
Absolutely.
And that you are not going to swing one way or the other. And you've got to work hard. You've got to work really hard.
It is hard work. Yep.
Yeah.
It is. That's really helpful, Irene, in terms of the one-to-ones. And one of the things that we get asked is about neurodiversity. And we had planned to do a question on that, but actually it deserves a lot more than what we can cover. So Joanna has got a wee poll for our audience. If you feel that it would be really helpful for us to do a one-off session on mediation and neurodiversity, we would be very happy to do it if there is a need for it. So it would be really helpful, folks, just take a second to fill in the yes or no. We would find that really helpful to plan out future sessions, and I can see it popping up. Thank you, people, for contributing to all of that. Keep going with that. Really helpful. And I know, Joanna, you'll end it whenever you feel we've got everybody's thoughts on it. Can we move back to Barbara then to look at the joint or team session? And I guess what we've been doing up to now is just making, I suppose I've been making a kind of assumption that it's with one-to-one, but of course it's not necessarily one-to-one. It could be team mediations. So thinking, Barbara, what happens at a joint session? How long might it take, either when it's two parties or more? So just some initial thoughts on that.
So again, just as Irene said earlier, you know, how long is a piece of string? And again, I think it depends on the complexity. A joint session maybe would take less time than a team session, because obviously there's going to be two parties and then more. I would say you're probably looking at, suppose, like, you know, it could last half an hour, but it could last half a day, you know,
Yes.
depending on the individuals. I suppose in the joint session, if it's a one-to-one joint session, the parties are afforded uninterrupted speaking time. that can vary too, depending on the individuals. We tend to say, you know, try and have a short period of uninterrupted speaking time. I've had an experience where somebody came with a 26-page document and wanted to read that. So you can imagine that would have taken probably 2 days to do that. But we managed to get that into bullets, and I think it's probably key to do that. So bring what you're bringing to the table in that uninterrupted speaking time. Then you'll have the opportunity to have a further discussion once each party's had their uninterrupted speaking time. The team sessions are a bit different.
Yeah.
Because you will have had one-to-one sessions with each individual, and then that setup is slightly different because the mediator has identified the themes that should be discussed there. And so therefore that's more of a joint discussion, and everybody is afforded the opportunity to have their say there too. So yeah, as I say, I think it depends on the complexity in a joint session, and very much so in I suppose the number of parties in the team. But you know, at the end of the day, the opportunity is there for them to shape, and I've said this already probably, you know, shape the way forward, but take the opportunity to have your say and do that. And this mediation as a whole is a great opportunity to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, you've just said something there, because I think when we talk about what you do if you get stuck, because there are times, you know, and we'll share the results of the poll when we finish these questions with Barbara. What do you do when you get stuck? And there are times when you're sitting as a mediator and you're like, right, okay. And we all have our wee strategies and our ways of dealing with it. What's yours?
So I suppose, I think, bearing in mind what I said earlier about the mediator not making any decisions, you know, if I find that the colleagues are stuck, or, you know, that they're going round in circles, then sometimes they just need to agree to disagree. So I would pass it back to them and say, okay, so what do you want to do next? What, you know, will we move off this topic? You've had a discussion about it. We're going round in circles. We're not going to probably achieve agreement there, but it doesn't mean that the mediation can't continue, because there's probably other things that we can talk about. So yeah, sometimes it's good to just move on from that with their agreement to do that. Or I maybe would say to them, okay, so, you know, what do you want to happen next? So again, you know, the mediator's not taking responsibility for that. They're passing it back to the individuals. And yeah, that's probably the way that I would move that. Or sometimes take a break.
Yes.
Because people can then regather their thoughts. And then come back, you know, with something else to put forward.
There is, as you say, and I think you've said, it's the opportunity. They have the opportunity for their future career in their hands on that day. And if they don't come to an agreement, what's it going to be like tomorrow? So absolutely. Would you ever stop a mediation? Would you ever go, right, that's enough?
And you know, I have done that. So you sometimes get parties come and they say they're, you know, it's a voluntary process. They say they're happy to come, and then you can see the behaviours shift. It's just about the mediator identifying that. And if there's, you know, if there's no engagement, then what's the point? Because they're wasting mediators' time, they're wasting their own time. And they're probably in amongst that causing a bit of upset too. To the other party. So yes, I would stop. If there's inappropriate behaviour, also, you know, if somebody starts to shout, in the ground rules at the outset of a mediation, we normally say, listen to what's being said, don't interrupt, all of these things. So I don't have a teaching background, but sometimes I feel a wee bit like a teacher going back to the ground rules and saying, hang on a minute, this is what you signed up to. And And also, if you feel that somebody's just so emotionally upset that you know it's not fair to put that person through that, then yeah, definitely.
Okay.
You know, so the aggression, anger,
Yes.
volatility towards the other. Mediators are always very conscious of that behaviour.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
that's really, really helpful. I think I'll just share the results of that poll quickly before we go on to Irene. So 89% yes for mediation. And in terms of investigations that include 32% yes, 68% no. That's helpful. We'll certainly do the one for mediation. That's for sure. Okay. Okay.
Wow.
Can we move on to Irene to have a wee think of what's about success rate?
I'm just thinking, Dorothy, we're going to be back on here with that new poll, so that's great.
Absolutely, yeah. So, what does a successful mediation look like?
Yeah,
we get asked that a lot, and it can be extremes. So, I'm conscious of the time, so let's speed through this. I want to get a fair bit of time for questions because I can see there's quite a lot.
Oh, this is an awesome area because I think out there people think a successful mediation means you've got two people that have fallen out, they're going to make good with each other, they're going to be all pals, they're going to go for a coffee or go to the pub or whatever, off we go. And I kind of came at this with that belief, and then I've realised that's really not the reality. It's really hard. If you want to measure success in a number, yeah, we can do that. We can have 80%, 90% agreed. But actually, in my experience, if you want to dig really deep, it's not about numbers. And sometimes it might be that people haven't actually reached an agreement. And this is probably a bit tough for those out there in the HR world to hear, because I think sometimes people get in that room and realise it ain't gonna happen. There's no going back. They've fallen out. There's a big old issue here. But what hopefully it does do is help line managers understand, what do we do now? What do we have to do now? So it might be.
But that's not the majority.
No, it's not.
No, so I think we need to be careful with that, because
Okay.
what is a successful mediation might be two people just shaking hands at the end, thinking, I still hate you, but I'm going to work with you, and it's not going to disrupt our work. And then the other end. So let's talk about that.
That's a great correction. So probably 90% plus do shake hands and go for a coffee or pub visit or whatever. And that's amazing, and that's a great thing to see. But actually what we also need to think about is sometimes that's not going to happen. But actually that doesn't mean I think that the mediation's failed.
And what does it mean then?
That might mean there's a different solution.
And I guess the other side of that is that the two have heard what each other thinks of each other, what each other needs.
Exactly.
And they might come out the end of it thinking, right, okay, I might not even shake your hand, but I now know if I behave in that way to you tomorrow, it's going to cause trouble.
And that
for me, that's the minimum that you want to get out of a mediation.
Dorothy, that might also mean that for the HR people or the line managers, there's a different route they have to go down. And I think what I'm trying to express here probably is that in the ideal world, we get shaking of hands and it's great, but actually sometimes it means that we get a different output, but it could be a good success.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I know, when I've done mediations, there are times when at the end of it, they've shared what they think of each other, they've shared how it makes them feel, that intent and impact is fully understood. And each party has said, right, okay, I understand that drives you up the walls and it doesn't help, and I'm not going to do that anymore.
Exactly.
With another group or individuals, it might be back to the flip chart, as Barbara talked about, where these are all the things that I'm going to do differently. And they say, yep, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
Or it
so-
might just be, grand, I've heard you, that's fine. Shake hands.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us on to the outcome. And because you've talked through what the outcome might be. The outcome might be, actually, we're still unhappy with this, but
Yeah.
that would be fed back in some way. So talk to me about permissions to feedback to.
Yeah, that's a great shout, Dorothy. So permission to feedback, it's got to be with the agreement of the parties.
Yes.
So bearing in mind, we've got here an informal process, which is confidential. So if the parties agree to disagree, which is quite often the case, how do they then handle that communication? And how does that go back to either the line manager or the commissioning manager? And we've got to deal with that.
Yeah, what I find is that, you know, if it's come after a grievance, then there's probably a couple of areas that the commissioning manager has said, I want you to go to mediation to talk about, to make a difference to these 1, 2, 3, or 4 areas.
Yes.
And I've been quite happy with that, so long as the managers have let the 2 parties know that that is the purpose of the mediation.
Exactly.
And right at the beginning, in the one-to-ones, clarified with each of the parties what's your understanding of the reasons, make sure they're all on the same page, and then it's what is your understanding as to where the outcome of this is going to go. And you know, that works. And what I've done where it's been a significant challenge to out of a grievance, then I've written up the outcome, but asked the 2 parties to agree, comment, etc. before it goes anywhere. So it is that confidential process, as you say, that is absolutely within the bounds of why the whole process was set up. And everybody understanding that.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. That's really, really helpful, Irene.
Thank you.
We thought before we opened up to questions, we'd just do a wee quick feedback for you to just let us know. Let me get my share button on here. Can you just give us a quick, this will just take a couple of seconds, just scan that QR code and let us know how we've done with this. And Rona, while folk are doing that, perhaps you could start thinking about or giving us some questions, and I'll take this down in a minute. We've got about 20 minutes, so hopefully we'll get a few questions in.
Absolutely, Dorothy. Wow, that's been brilliant. You know, there's so much information come through from there. And, you know, I think myself about what it would be like to be a mediator, because it's such a skilled role. And actually a couple of the questions that have come through cover that. So there's a couple of linked questions we've got. The first one was, do you need to be trained or qualified to undertake informal mediation?
If I would just pop in with that and say that we wouldn't do a mediation for any organisation as a mediator without the mediators being trained in an appropriate qualification. Barbara and Irene, highly trained, a number of us trained. And if I go back to when I was in HR, I thought I could mediate until I went on the training course and I thought, oh, blooming heck, I'm not doing this right at all. And it gave me so many tools, and the tools for me were the tools to facilitate other people to come up with their own solutions, whilst your HR or manager knowledge was able to reality check with people. You know, so somebody who comes in and says, oh, I'm not going to come in unless you sack them. Well, that's not going to happen. That's a reality check. So we wouldn't go in if we weren't qualified, because it's difficult. And if you were in-house, you could maybe facilitate a conversation. You would need to be seen as independent. You would need to have good facilitation skills. And I know, having been in-house for a lot longer than I've been doing this, it is very difficult to be independent, especially if you're HR, and according to what your organisation culture is as to who HR are and what they're not. So hope that helps a little bit.
Dorothy, just to add to that, I think you're 100% right. So I had an HR background also, and I think as an HR consultant, you try to solutionize, to try and resolve, and that's the big thing that I find different when I'm mediating.
Yeah.
I'm actually it's really quite powerful to allow the parties to try and reach that solution themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think linking in with that, it's the term mediation. You know, we opened up with Barbara talking about what is mediation and what it isn't. And sometimes is the word mediation used for what could be a facilitated conversation. So understanding the difference between a facilitated conversation and what is a mediation is really important.
Yeah.
So there was a linked question. So what is required to allow me to be able to undertake informal mediation at work? So perhaps somebody is interested in getting trained. You've mentioned about the training. Are there courses out there readily available, good quality ones?
Yeah.
Yep.
Barbara or Irene, do you want to pop in?
Yeah,
I know we've all been trained by different people, so
yeah, I picked up on that one. So my training initially was with ACAS many years ago. There's other kind of formal organisations like Total Conflict Management who do that. I think ACAS, if you were looking to go down this route, they're probably your kind of best bet.
Sorry, Irene.
Yeah. I think they're deemed to be professional. They're deemed to be knowing what they're all about. They're not the most expensive either.
The training is expensive.
It is.
But the skills that it gives you are far wider than mediation. I did my training when I was in-house, and I was very much aware that I was dealing with people differently. Instead of always thinking I had to solutionize, that's a good word, Barbara, I never heard of that before, but it's a good one, was to pull out, to pull the answer out from people. So that was wonderful, really good experience. But the other thing I would think you would need to watch out for is an organisation that does mediation for the employment context. Because there are organisations that have mediators for all sorts of other things that their model, that model that we described, that interactive model where we try and keep in the joint session people together as much as we can. There are other models where they separate people out, have a conversation separately, get you back in again, all of that stuff, that shuttle mediation process, which is appropriate for different contexts. Absolutely not for the workplace, given you want people to work together tomorrow.
I think that's a great point, Dorothy. And I think Barbara and I speak regularly. And I think what we would say is, because we come at this with a whole background of working in HR, so we've handled all of the grievance, all of the appeals, all of the employment tribunals painfully, very painfully. But actually, that means as a mediator, you kind of know what you're trying to do here to sort stuff out.
Without controlling it or without directing it.
People go off and do these 1 week courses, as I did many years ago, and that's great. But actually, if you arrive at this from a place of experience in your field, that makes a big difference.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yep.
And we would hope that's what, I guess, to McKinney HR, what Barbara and I can offer, that we've got, there's no pulling the wool, bottom line. We've been there, we've seen it, we've done the tribunal, we've done the grievance. Don't pull the wool. We know where we're at. So,
and that's the task of reality checking. That is really helpful. Rona, some more questions?
Yep. So we've got, is there legislation or a code of practice which governs the mediation process?
No, but but we are all McKinney HR, and I know Barbara and Irene are all can't remember the term, but we're all registered with Scottish Mediation.
Yeah.
And they have to be registered, they require you to have done sufficient training to keep your development going, all of that. So that's what we comply with. So yeah, I know Scottish Mediation's trying to do more on that to try and get some kind of governance-y type standards, but it's not there yet.
Excellent. Okay. And then we talked about feeding back after you've completed the mediation.
Yeah.
But what happens if one party agrees on feeding back, but the other doesn't?
Well, you work at it to try and get something that they both agree on, and it has to be in their control. I've done mediations where they've said no, don't want any feedback to anybody besides saying that we had the session and it's fine. Now the commissioning manager might have said, I want to know what happened, and I know Angela has these conversations of, well, you will only know what happened if the parties agree to tell you. Other parties will come to, well, yes, this is what we're going to do differently, and I want you to let my manager know, and I want you to let HR know, because they think that there'll be some kind of monitoring of it and that'll help the process. I've had some where one has agreed, yep, that's exactly what we spoke about, and you know, I use a flip chart. I don't know if Irene does, Barbara sometimes does. I use a flip chart a lot with mediations, and I will write up exactly what we talked about from the flip chart. And I've sent that typed it up, sent it to the two parties. One's come back to say, no, that's not what we agreed. And the other has said, yes, it is. And I've gone back and forwards. We've slimmed it down. And then I have agreed with the two parties a form of wording that I use for the commissioning manager. So there is a lot of, there's a lot of back and forwards with that.
Yeah.
Rona,
that's a cracking question, Rona. It's probably the one that kind of sits out there beyond mediation. And I think it's probably, for me, one that I would talk to the parties about. What would be the benefits of sharing more information?
Yeah.
What are you going to get out of it? What your line manager going to get out of it? So I think you can probably subtly do a little bit of influencing.
Yeah, because you hope you never get to that place of them not agreeing.
Without being too controlling, because that's not what we're about. Yeah, it's a cracker of a question.
Okay.
Any others?
Yes. So can mediation be done incorrectly? So you've mentioned a couple of things throughout the session, but can you pull that together and give us just a bit of a summary about
incorrectly?
Incorrectly. So how can you do it badly?
How can you do it badly? You can do it badly by not knowing what you're doing. By, and Barbara, pop in please, by not being independent, by putting your will on people. And that can be hard, because if you're internal doing it, you know what the organization wants, and because they've told you, and you have said as a mediator, well, it depends on what the parties say and do, etc., all that really good stuff. But if you have a mediator who's in with the idea, oh, I'm going to come out the other end with X and Y, it's not going to work, because that will become clear during the process.
If you're I think, I suppose none of us as qualified mediators would ever go in not to do it properly. However, I think what you have to be very mindful of is when you're setting up that you don't have one party and not the other. And I'm normally quite conscious of meeting people in a lobby and taking them into the room at the same time in case they think I've been having a word behind their back. And
I know. Yes.
I think you have to be very, and the impartiality thing. You might, confession time. You might be sitting as a mediator thinking, "For God's sake," and agreeing with one party and not agreeing with the other. But you can't, because your credibility is then question, isn't it? So
And I suppose it's that also giving each of them the same amount of time as each other.
Yeah.
So if you spend a lot of time listening to one person speaking, one of the big things you get told in the training, now I'm way back to the training thing, is when one person's speaking, you can't do this on a Zoom call, but you're looking at the person who's speaking, but you're checking in with the person who's not speaking.
Yeah.
So you're still engaging, it's all those good maintaining rapport skills and balance.
And after that conversation, you're saying, so, what do you think about that to the other party? So you're involving them all the time.
Yes. Yep.
No, I think that's a great point, Dorothy, around the whole power imbalance thing, because you've got to make sure that both parties feel equally involved. And we probably would kind of forget sometimes the more senior person feels more vulnerable. Because they may feel chased into mediation.
Yes.
Whereas the more junior person thinks, this is what I want as an outcome from my grievance. So it's a really interesting one.
And we do get times, I mean, I remember having a mediation where the two parties were fantastic on the one-to-one meetings. And I thought, this is going to go okay. I sensed some hesitancy with the company, and they told me a little bit of the story. I said, no, I don't need any more. You don't really want too much of the story. You'd want enough to feel that, yes, this could work in a mediation. And when I got the two people together in the room, one of them turned into a banshee. I couldn't believe it. It was just like, what the name of God's happening here? So, that was me thinking, I'll try not to say any rude words. And I stopped it, and I took each of them. I took the one who turned into the banshee aside, and then I got her back, and then I took the other one aside, brought them back together, and it lasted about half an hour. And I said, I'm going to have to stop this now. And I spoke to each of them separately, and I went back to the company to say, I've stopped it. This is why I've stopped it. And the company said, well, we knew that would happen, but we just needed something on paper to protect us if we go to employment tribunal. And I felt like slapping everybody in that process. But that doesn't happen often. That was, for me,
I'm loving the banshee.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I must remember that.
Aye, a banshee.
Banshee.
Rona.
I've
Stop me talking more about banshees.
One more question, but it's a cracking one. So what if one party is looking for a solution or a change that's just not workable or reasonable?
Reality checking, then. That is the one area where the mediator, I think, is challenging for us mediators. It's easy if somebody says, I'm not going to work with them anymore, you need to move them somewhere else. And my response, and I'm sure Barbara and Aaron would say, well, is that reasonable? Do you think your manager would approve that? And normally they come back and say, nah, I don't really think that would happen. We'd talk around it, wouldn't we? Is that something your organisation does? Do they move people around? And then they go, no, that wouldn't really happen. So reality check, and I guess for us in the workplace, the experience of working in that HR context helps us with that reality check.
It does. And I think, Dorothy, I agree with everything you say. There's a next really good question, which to that individual is, so what do you think is going to happen now?
Yes. Yeah.
How would you resolve this?
Yes. What do you think would work?
Question. How would you resolve this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that normally falls on deaf ears.
Yes. Yes.
They want you to answer it. They don't want to have to do it themselves.
Yeah. Rona, back to you to finish off.
Well, that's all the questions, but fantastic questions today. Really useful information. So hopefully everybody has learned a lot today, but excited that we can have a follow-up session on this topic as well. So I just want to say thanks particularly to Irene and Barbara for giving up your time today to come and join us. It's been really great to have you on. And thanks to everyone who was able to attend as well. So hopefully we'll see you at a future webinar as well.